to our study of Malachi this first week. It's good there are 6 of us here, and hopefully there will be others who will join us in weeks to come. Malachi is a bit of an enigma, really. His book is the last book of the Old Testament, so he's easy to find, but his name is not referred to anywhere else in the scriptures. Most of the other prophets come up and are quoted by various people, sometimes in the New Testament and occasionally in the Old Testament. But Malachi was not that popular, or was not somebody who got himself quoted very much. He was an interesting fellow. We don't even really know what his name was, because the name Malachi means my messenger, and it isn't really a name. So our only source for the study of Malachi is the little book that bears his name, and it is accepted by scholars as genuine throughout. There is, of course, debate, isn't there, on many of the other books in the Bible as to whether there were bits of them that were written by somebody else, whether they were a compilation of other people's work. But this one seems to stand alone. And it contains a number of utterances grouped under the general caption, "The Burden of the Word of Yahweh" by Malachi. And Malachi doesn't keep to the usual prophetic style. His words were evidently intended by himself to be received as prophetic. But in any case, they supply us with a first-hand source from which we may gather something of what he thought, though they tell us absolutely nothing about him directly. And as I said, not even his name. Nor do we know exactly when he lived. Somebody, was it you, Sharon, said to me the other day, he was about 300 years before Christ. But it looks as though perhaps he was a bit earlier than that. It must have been in the Persian period, because he uses the word governor, P-E-H-A-H, to denote the official in charge of the district. And that was a term that was employed elsewhere by Persian officers. And the temple is evidently standing, so we have to place him after 516 BC, which was the date of its rebuilding. Now, he is, as I say, he's an interesting man, because he is very much a complaining man. He complains of marriages with heathen women and stinginess towards the temple services, both of which evils were attacked by Nehemiah and Ezra. And so it's customary amongst scholars to set him shortly before the Nehemiah-Ezra reforms, say about 460 BC. But we must remember that this is not a certain date. So for those of you who like precision, I'm afraid we can't give it with Malachi's actual dates. And unlike the books of Haggai and Zechariah, his book contains no dating of its own. In any case, it seems likely that it was published before the priest's code became authoritative, because it speaks, as does Deuteronomy, of the priests as sons of Levi, not of Aaron, whilst the priest's code derives them from Aaron as ancestor. And so Malachi lived among a complaining people. It's very reminiscent of today, I think. Times have not changed. People have grumbled throughout history, and the folk in Malachi's day, among whom he was living, complained. They complained about all sorts of things, but mostly they complained about God. It was a time of economic depression. Farming was going badly, and most of the people seemed to have been dependent on farming. A succession of parasites had attacked the crops, and the vines were casting their fruit prematurely. This was interpreted in the usual way as a sign of Yahweh's disfavor. Yet the people couldn't understand why he should be so harsh with them. They felt they had served him faithfully. No great breach of duty was on their consciences. They were paying their tithes and they were bringing animals to sacrifice. Yahweh's ordinances were being observed, and they'd humbled themselves before him in mourning and doubtlessly in fasting. And so there it was. They did these things so that they might avert the wrath of God. But it was all in vain, because their miseries continued, and it was aggravated by the prosperity of persons who made no pretense of caring for Yahweh, but openly derided religion and talked with insolent contempt of God. Their conduct was in open defiance of his righteous laws, yet nothing happened to them. And all this led to discontent with Yahweh. They were really fed up. Why did he not give them any evidence of his love? Why did he not intervene to vindicate his righteous government? Not that the people were rebellious. They continued to serve him and to give him their allegiance, but they did complain among themselves at his slackness, and we'll see that later on. And indeed, their religious faith was being severely tested. Had there not been definite promises made by Haggai and Zechariah as to the prosperity which would come if only the temple were restored? Had they not been told by 2nd Isaiah and by Zechariah that Yahweh's attitude had changed from anger to favour, and that they might expect a new age of blessing? Yet he was still afflicting them. Someone was needed to speak out for Yahweh, and now that person had appeared. And Malachi came forward as Yahweh's advocate. Now, let's go and look at the first chapter of Malachi. We have only 4 chapters in this book, so that's why we had the 4 sessions. And perhaps it might be useful if I identify one of the peoples who come up quite a lot in this, and that's the peoples of Edom. And the peoples of Edom are referred to in Isaiah in 2 places. Isaiah 11:14 says, "They will swoop down on the slopes of Palestina to the west. Together they will plunder the people to the east. They will subdue Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites will be subject to them." So Edom were there, even in Isaiah's time, as a nation who had been downtrodden. And then it says, the desert, Isaiah 34, the desert owl and screech owl will possess it. The great owl and the raven will nest there. God will stretch out over Edom the measuring line of chaos and the plumb line of desolation. So they weren't in for a good time, the Edomites. And so that is Edom, which is referred to when we get to verse 4. Now, I think that Malachi introduces his prophecy in rather an odd way. I don't recall any of the other prophets, correct me if I'm wrong, starting out a prophecy, the word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. So there it is. Do you know of any others that start like that?